welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on. Do you want to do a bit of an intro, a bit about yourself and where you work, etc.?
Yeah, perfect. So thanks for having me. Yeah. I'm Dean Bryen. I currently work for UBS, the bank. I'm the CTO for Cloud. So that involves kind of looking after our journey towards the cloud, which is, as you can imagine, a pretty big program.
Yeah.
Prior to this current job, I did that for a couple of years. Prior to that, I worked at Microsoft. I led some engineering and developer relations teams there. Also was an architect for a while, and then also worked at AWS as well. So transitioned from vendor side over to customer side more recently.
Yeah, and what's that been like? As in, like, the responsibility. I guess the responsibility is. It'd be good to kind of know what that means responsibility-wise. I guess, is it quite a large, like the cloud? Is it like all clouds, including on-premise stuff? Is it like all-encompassing, the role, or is it?
Yeah, so it's probably not that well defined, to be honest,
right.
But it's kind of all cloud, definitely public cloud, hybrid as well. So some of the stuff we're doing around the Azure Stack stuff, we're in that space as well. And then also it covers some other kind of cloud services that might not necessarily be considered as like infra cloud, so some of the more kind of SaaS-based cloud stuff, and any kind of other providers that we're using that aren't the major free kind of cloud providers. So we might be using like a managed messaging service or something.
Right, okay. So like it could cover, but more in the app devy.
Yeah, so consider
side,
it like generally stuff developers use to build products inside the bank. Yeah.
So it's like dev cloud almost remit.
Yeah, so
like
so kind of and also developer tooling as well. So it covers things like our CI/CD pipeline and the tooling that we use for that, and some of the developer tooling that kind of encompasses like how developers develop and developer workstations and that kind of stuff as well. So it's kind of all encompassing in some ways. Yeah, there's a lot that comes under that banner. Yeah.
And then because you said you worked for Microsoft and Amazon. And then Amazon, were they similar roles or were they kind of different roles? Was it?
So I kind of did similar at both, actually. I worked as an architect at both, and then I also worked in our developer advocacy team, so with our product group and our community, like trying to improve our products. So I kind of did that at Amazon, and then I did a similar kind of thing at Microsoft as well. So yeah, quite similar, yeah.
And favourites? I'm joking to put you on the spot.
All the cloud providers are great.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, they're all like equally as good as each other.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
Don't want to hinder any future job opportunities.
But I guess for to come from that background and then to go to UBS, and I suppose most of those, I mean, it's expanded massively, but a lot of them were focused on kind of application centricity. So in and around dev space.
Yeah.
So what's it been like going from the purist view of like how someone should consume the vendor to actually then the reality of like being in a customer end, but then being responsible for that as well in relation to the cloud?
Yeah, so I guess that's two questions, right? So I'm very much a tech purist as well. So I'm all about, like what's the modern way to build stuff? Like I was an early beta tester for Lambda when I was at AWS in 2014. I was a big serverless advocate, looking at cloud native, like modern app architectures. And I think, to be honest, when we work at cloud vendors, and people will probably attest to this, and you realize it more once you've left, you live in a bit of a bubble, right? And I think I was at AWS quite early as well. So we had a small number of services, and then you grow with that as well. So there was like 20 services when I joined AWS, right? Yeah. And then as each new one got released, you learn about each new one. So that means that you kind of grew with it really quickly, and you kind of like, oh, that's the new thing, right? This is the way we're going to do things. It changes, and you'd adopt new things really, really quickly. And I worked with a lot of customers when I was at the vendor side, and I kind of realized their frustration in some ways as well. And I felt that we were often kind of talking always about the happy path, right? Like you go and read any document, of course, right? That's how it works, right? You go and read docs.aws.com, docs.microsoft.com, and you go and read a product doc, the getting started guide, and it's like, oh, just turn this on, do this, do that, right? And then customers are like, well, I can't do that because of X and Y and Z. So I really wanted a taste of like, what is this actually like if I'm actually building it on the customer side. I want to go and live that experience for a bit and see what those pain points are. And Yeah, boy, have I learned, I've learned some of those, yeah.
And has it been quite, I guess at this point, the cloud's matured a fair bit. But I kind of agree, sorry, like, because it's just when you say when you go and read like the happy path, there's also like, if you try and read different docs, you get different flavors of the doc by a vendor too. So like sometimes when you're trying to do your research, you're like trying to find out like what is the right thing, and you can get like different, slightly contradictory things that are like, is that the authoritative truth of like how you're supposed to do it? But so I kind of agree on that, and like trying to relate it to what you're doing in the customer from the happy path. It's like there is always a delta difference.
Well, yeah, and I think like they've got a lot better now, but in the early days you'd go through like a getting started guide and it'd be like create an IAM policy with star.thingy, right? And you're like, there's no way, like, I mean, I work in a regulated industry, there's no way 99% of customers can do that, right? So and they've got a lot better, I think, in that space, all the cloud providers. But it's just like living those kind of things and understanding and trying to do things in a compliant and a secure manner is really, really important. But what we also don't want to do is let that stifle innovation. So as I said, like, there's something new that comes out and we want to use that, right? Or somebody wants to use that inside a regulated industry. Historically, they'd be years behind. So one of the things that I think we can do now is try and build frameworks and models and practices so that we can adopt new technology, so we can stay up with the curve across all those kind of enterprises, I guess, but while being compliant and secure as well. So that's a constant challenge of using what's new and what helps the business go forward, but making sure that's done in a secure, compliant manner as well.
And the roles and responsibilities, have they stayed the same? Like, have you still got the same kind of pillars of like accountability and responsibilities of like, I guess a bit of a shift on platform engineering principles, but like as in like the well-architected framework, for example, right? There's like, for cloud vendors, if you're like, who's really responsible for network changes, for example, could be the platform team, could be another team. Same with security policy, could be the security team.
Right, so kind of like the shared responsibility model, I guess.
Yeah, like who's doing what in all of this, and is that is it platform engineering focused, or is it like more like diversified in terms of like who's got responsibility on bits of the cloud?
So I think the model that I like to like kind of advocate for is kind of centralized and decentralized, right? So historically, big tech and enterprises was a very central function, right? Yeah. And then everyone saw the whole DevOps movement and was like, right, you build it, you run it, over to you, you go build it. And I think historically, in a lot of companies, that's caused quite a lot of carnage, to be fair. People building stuff that don't really understand it, lots of duplication of effort across multiple teams. So there's kind of like this middle ground. Maybe there's an extra person that's on that shared responsibility model. I haven't really thought about it like this before, but you've kind of got what's responsibility of the vendor, and then you've got the responsibility of like a central platform team, which might be a little bit more, but there's still something that the application teams that are building on top of those internal platforms are required to do. So I guess there's a slightly different responsibility model with an extra party in it, I guess, rather than just vendor customer. There's the platform team that sits in the middle. Yeah,
and I guess because there's different, because we've like worked with different people and there's different models. There isn't like a one size fits all either. Course, like, so every org seems to be adopting it slightly differently, but some people keep the traditional way of how they've currently operated, which might be that the security teams could even enforce over the platform teams, right? In theory, so they could put policy in and define those policies around everybody holistically across the cloud, no matter who they are. Same for networks; they could have like a hub spokey style. Everything goes through that, and then they're authoritative for like what can talk to what.
Right, yeah, or you may have someone that controls the foundational networks, right? But then you can manage your own security groups around your resources or something.
So it's always like a sliding.
Yeah, and it makes spectrum. It a bit more of a grey area, because you say like, right, networks. Well, some of us you're responsible for some of the networking, but not all of the networking in that particular scenario. So I think that's an interesting kind of paradigm shift, and talk about kind of people as well, right? Like, understanding that in an organization where, as I said, most enterprises have had a central tech function, and all of a sudden they're like, and literally like historically, like maybe 10 plus, a lot of companies, a lot less years ago, would be like, I need a server, give me a server, I'm going to give you a jar file, you go run my code, right? That mentality shift is really, really hard for people to kind of understand, oh, actually I'm responsible for a bit more. And I think what's really interesting is that we see a lot of people say, I'm cloud first. Right, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right, we've made a big, bold statement, right? Like you see this from companies all over the place, right? We're going to go cloud first. We're going to do 100% in the cloud, 50% in the cloud, 60, whatever. But they normally set like some kind of goal or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I'm not even sure what that means, right? And then they go, right, go do it, right? And then they say, oh, we read the DevOps thing from 15 years ago. You build it, you run it now, right? And then, like, but we don't know how to build and how to run it. We haven't got the skills. For years, we've just given you a jar file and you run us the server, right? So what's actually more important than putting a stake, like, it's really important to put a stake in the ground, right? I think that's really important from an executive perspective. Say, right, this is the travel of direction. This is the North Star where we want to be. But what's more important is helping people along that journey. You can't just expect that everyone's just going to get there.
Yeah.
Right. And if they do, and a lot of people probably do, but it's probably going to be a mess. It's going to be all lift and shift, right? Everything's just gone straight in as it is on premises. So helping people understand and learn and evolve and change their mindset and their skills along that journey is really interesting. And then the platform team aspect comes into it, and that's where you kind of help those people on the journey from tooling and platforms and products and things like that.
Yeah, because I guess like some companies, if you predate, which UBS will obviously predates the age of cloud,
right.
Been around longer.
Yeah, longer than you and I have been alive, right?
Exactly. So I guess it's got a history of its own of like investments and operations and like, you know, so there's that in itself has a lot of baggage, right? So it's going to carry some baggage to it. Some things will be really good, some things might not be so great and might need to be changing. But then you can have like a fintech, which is like, right, I'm starting from like zero.
Born in the cloud.
Yeah, born in the cloud. I do everything in the new way. And, you know, in some ways they kind of get used as as almost like an archetype of like, even for large enterprises where they're like, well, you know, these other regulated companies are doing these things, if you see what I mean. But you're like, yeah, no, but like they've obviously started like a year ago or something, or like 2 years ago.
And that's kind of the one of the thing about, you say, moving from vendor to customer is like from most vendors' eyes, and like I'm talking kind of generally here because that's not fair to say that, because a lot of people that work at vendors have got years of industry experience, right? So I don't want to, that's kind of a throwaway comment, but in the way they look at it is like, well, this is a brand new service, so like this is how you do Lambda, or this is how you do functions, right? Of course it's easy, right? And it is easy if you're starting from scratch.
Nothing, yeah.
So I think part of the challenge for a lot of enterprises is how do we get to there from where we are now? Because you can't just start the bonfire. You can't just light a match and throw a torch at what you've got existingly, blow the whole lot up and start from scratch. That would be lovely, wouldn't it? If we could all just like
just wipe the slate clean.
Wipe the slate clean and start again. So it's getting the right balance between that. And I think in some instances you can do that. So if you look at like developer tooling, moving away slightly from kind of cloud infrastructure, if you look at developer tooling, I think you could go and build a brand new, fresh CI/CD pipeline. You've got GitOps-based deployment process, all these kind of like modern way of doing things, but you set clear entry criteria, right? So the way I like to say this is the ticket to the show is pretty expensive, but man, this show is good, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to have fully automated test coverage. You've got to have infrastructure as code for all deployments, right? Then you can come along, you can join this new pipeline. So that's kind of a way of doing things fresh and incentivizing people. Like, oh, you can deploy like automatically, all the security checks are done, right? There may be some manual stuff in there from early on, but it's like way quicker than the traditional way of doing it. It's like a carrot kind of dangling to incentivize people to build that entry criteria. And a lot of greenfield applications would onboard to that, and then over time, maybe as stuff gets refactored and whatnot, it could onboard onto that. So there's kind of ways that you can introduce some of that new way of thinking. But the way I like to think about it as well is that don't leave the other people completely behind. So I'll give you an example. So if I'm going to do some static security testing as part of my pipeline, for example, right, that will be a component of the fully automated, brand new, fresh, shiny thing that gets you deployed to production in 5 minutes, right? Whatever, right? But also we'll build that in an extensible way so that you can still use that component in the old world if you want to. And you might not need all of the entry criteria, but you might need a smaller one for that. And then that brings people along the journey so they can start building the entry criteria and start using those components. They're like, actually, we'll flip over to the new thing in our next release or whatever. It might take time, but at least you're bringing them, to my earlier point, you're bringing them on the journey with you rather than leaving everybody behind.
Yeah.
So where you can, it's not always possible, but try and build things in an extensible way so that they can be pluggable and people can kind of incrementally come along on the journey if they're not quite ready yet.
Yeah, I guess something is like the scale of a place, like any large enterprise, and UBS is just a example of one, but anything at such vast scale is quite like the nature of the complexity of it is quite hard on like whether like all the life cycle of all the decisions that you're kind of making over time.
Yeah.
Like they're all like decisions on a spectrum that maybe some are adopting at different points in time as you're kind of going on a journey, even maybe as a central team that's kind of sharing the services back, which then makes it very different because of that sheer vast nature of the scale of like how many shapes of things over time do you kind of have to manage, and how do you align those, and do you need to, and does it make sense to, or do you leave them alone, and do you know what I mean? It's quite it's very complicated, really.
Yeah, and there's so many dimensions, and like you say, not only just, I guess it falls under that kind of shapes of things, right? There's so many different requirements and people and decision points and existing process, and you can't just ignore the existing process because a lot of that is kind of carved in stone and been shared with, like it's understood, right? It's the way that things are done, right? And I'm not opposed to challenging the status quo. I think we should always challenge the status quo, but it takes time to change these things, and there's often not just there's often multiple stakeholders in order to make that kind of thing happen in any big company, right? So the shape of things is very different at different times, and some people are fully ready to say, right, I guess bit of a transition, I guess, to platform engineering, right? Some people are fully ready to go and adopt the cloud, right? They want to understand it. They know Terraform, ARM, Bicep, CloudFormation inside out. Right, just give me the APIs, right? I want to go and build this stuff myself. And there's other people that are still like, I don't understand it, but I'm going to try it. And there's other people there's some developers that don't want to understand it. I'm a developer, I write really great application code. You could be the best developer in the world. I'm not interested in writing a Bicep or an ARM or CDK or whatever it is thing to define my infrastructure declaratively. How do we build solutions for all of those kind of personas along that spectrum as well?
Yeah, that's hard. And also, some might want to learn it until they realize how dull it is. And then they're going to be like, oh, yeah, this is
well, everybody wants to learn Kubernetes, right? I call it resume-driven.
Yeah,
right?
But it is quite, I mean, no offense to the industry, by the way, but it is a little bit boring because a lot of it is API configuration, essentially.
Yeah, it's YAML files, right?
It's YAML files and Terraform, and it is a bit like, I suppose if it is all new, there might be something exciting about it because you are learning it. But once the novelty's wore off, you're probably going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to Devin. Do you know what?
Yeah, write lines and lines of YAML or JSON.
I'm just going to go back to writing some actual code. So like whether it'll stick will be a different question. Whether they'll stick at wanting to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like another question.
So I think we'll actually want to do that long term, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you can provide from a platform perspective, you can provide different solutions, and for the people that really want to get into the nuts and bolts of things, then you can let them get on with that, right?
Yeah.
Just let them, like, here you go, everyone gets access to the API anyway. Or you can kind of bring them on the journey as well, right? And this is where we look at topics like inner source, right? And saying, right, okay, well, you help us build the platform, right? You can help contribute back. Why don't you create a Terraform module and we'll store it in our registry, right? And the product owner should ultimately be responsible for maintaining that, but they can have contributors to their thing from the business, because they'll often be like, talking back about the innovation thing, like not stifling innovation. but being compliant. There's a big difference between making something available within an enterprise and making something that's usable in an enterprise. Now, in an ideal world, we would do both at the same time.
Yeah.
So we would say, we're not going to make this product, I don't know, let's pick something out of the air. S3, right, from AWS. We're not going to make this product available inside our business until it's met all the compliance controls. That's a non-negotiable anyway, right? But also, you've got to have well-documented CloudFormation templates. You've got to have you've got to manage it kind of like a product, right? You've got good documentation, not only how to deploy it, because obviously being able to deploy something inside a regulated business is very different to going to the public docs and trying to deploy it. There's lots of policy and things like that are in place. Not policy like written policy, but like policy is code, like Azure policy or whatever.
Enforced policy.
Enforced policy. Yeah. You'll try and deploy the template that comes off of the GitHub, right? And it just doesn't work. So it'd be great if we could say, we're not going to make S3 available inside the business until it's completely usable. We've got it well documented exactly how to use it inside our business. It meets all our controls. We've got a template that you deploy. Ideally, we've got some sort of IDP, an internal developer portal, where someone can deploy the template. Someone else just wants to click a button, right? There's all these. We cater for all that spectrum of people that I just spoke about. Ideal world, right? When you live in my world now, you don't live in the ideal world, right? And there's probably business demand for stuff. People want to use stuff straight away, and there's early adopters. And back to my original point, you don't want to stifle that innovation, right? If people want to start using something that's new, I mean, S3 isn't new, it's probably a bad example, but you get my point. If people want to start using something new, we really need to make that available. We need to make it available quickly. So the compliance thing is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Right? So that's making something available. Now, how do we make it usable?
Yeah.
Right? So maybe a model that could be proposed is that you make it available, and then the early adopters can use it. But then back to the inner source thing, we get them to contribute back. And as they start using it, they start contributing and building artifacts and thing. And then you maybe set a timeline and say, well, in 6 months after being available, you need to be usable.
Yeah.
And a word that I think a guy that I work with made up, he called it adoptability.
Yeah.
Right? How adoptable is a particular service? Because unfortunately in regulated industries, 9 times out of 10 we can't just use something off the shelf, right?
Yeah.
There has to be. I wouldn't say we can't use something off the shelf. You can use a lot of stuff off the shelf, but you just need to make sure that it needs to align to what.
Yeah, it needs to align to your standards.
Yeah, and if every application team in an enterprise is manually trying to align that to the standards, that's just bad, isn't it? Like, I don't even have to explain that. That's just.
So
bad.
is it then like commodity? Because like I suppose you've got like usability, which is like availability, which is like it's there. Usability, commodity, I suppose in some ways means that it's like it's so general purpose in its thought and its intention that like almost anybody could use it. I suppose that's how I look at like commodity, right? It's like, but then there's like how the assumptions you're making on that commodity on say the other person, because that's the bit that's hard, isn't it? It's like I've now under the guise of commodity, it's like, well, what's my assumption on the individual's knowledge of how commoditized this thing truly is? Because if you need to spend a couple of days like reading through all the docs and then understanding what it does, is that commodity or not? Or is it only suitable for certain people with certain experience?
Yeah.
You know,
and that poses another question as well around like how experienced do you want people to be?
Yeah.
Right. You could have a platform team or platform products or whatever term you want to use that builds these internal products in a way that you don't have to understand the product at all. You click a button, you get it, right? You want some storage, you want some compute, right? You click a button, you get it. You could even go a bit further and say, we're going to build a fully managed Kubernetes platform. You just chuck us a container image, we'll run it for you, we'll scale it for you.
We'll do everything. Yeah.
We'll do everything for you, right? And then that's an interesting paradigm, because how do you, like, what about all those skills you've got, right? What about all that knowledge you've got inside the application team? Like I say, there's some people that really understand it. And I also think I'm quite a strong believer in the fact that you should understand what you're building as well.
True.
So as someone who's been an architect for a long time, if you're going to build an application that's got some kind of queue, some asynchronous workflow, you've got, I don't know, some compute that's going on, a storage account, a database, you should probably understand what those things do to some sort of to some sort of level, right? Because you're gonna have to operate it, you're gonna have to look after it in the so I don't necessarily sit in that camp where we should just make things so easy it just magically appears for you and it all happens. And I also think that most application developers, although they don't want to write the infrastructure as code, they don't want to understand it and go through like the AWS or Azure or GCP docs and pick out all the components, they all still want to kind of understand what they're doing. They still want to architect their own solution, right? So it's kind of finding that middle ground where the key thing for me is that if every application team that's using your product is doing the same thing, then you should bundle it into the product. So if everybody is if everybody is trying to work out how to do a customer managed key, right, for your product, just bake it in. Bundle the key vault with it or whatever, or link, or put a parameter where they put the URI of their key vault in, right, and it handles that bit for them, because everyone's gonna have to work that out. If they're all using web apps and they're all having to go and get certificates and install certificates, right, just give them an option where they can just deploy in the certificates there. They still understand what web apps is and how it works, and they've got the parameters. So I think that's where you make that decision around whether to bundle something into a product, an internal product, or whether to not.
Yeah, I think I think the design principle for platform engineering is a bit that's kind of key, because I don't think there's that many shapes of so many things, right? Our database can only be configured in so many ways, and there's definitely going to be like an 80-20 rule on that, right? 80% of the parameters of this, like a dev just doesn't need to really worry about, and probably 20% maybe they do. And so there is a balance probably act of like what are commoditized sets of things for a service, and then what are the things that you just need to give us input on because they are in your area.
So it's kind of like, I think I was looking at Crossplane the other day, right?
Similar.
And they have like the above the API and below the API parameters, exactly. Right? So the below the API parameters, we don't even need to expose them to developers, right? But the above the API parameters may be a bit more important. And you can probably take that one step further as well around, we're talking about services, but what about patterns? Right? I can probably imagine that although people will probably argue with you or I, left, right and centre, that 80% of applications in most organisations could be functioned by a web app with a Postgres database and a storage account, right? like probably 80% of applications, right, that maybe some API management in front of it or something like that, right? But the point is that we can actually extrapolate that a bit further and start, once you've built these foundational products, do we start looking at patterns and how people use those products in like compositions, right? Like composition of those products together.
Because choice brings complexity. I think there's like a balance, isn't it? Choice brings complexity. Doesn't mean it's wrong necessarily, and then no choice brings like no innovation as well, to a point.
And I think
so you're in a bit of a bind of like, what's the right level of choice, what's the right level of innovation.
So people would use the word opinionated here, right? Like, how opinionated do we want to be, right? So some organisation might say, and there's some things where I think it's quite good to be opinionated, so but the term I prefer to use rather than opinionated is just, it's not even a term, right? Just giving people good options, right? So you want to deploy something inside your organisation. Well, there's a really good, easy way to do it with Terraform, right? And it goes through the pipeline. It's all GitOps, right? And even one step further, you want to deploy a web app in our organization? Cool, here's a web app, a database template, all done via Terraform. Right? That's a really good option for you. If you decide that you don't want to use that good option and you want to use PowerShell and use the native Azure API or whatever you want to, however you want to do it, go fill your boots. But you're going to have to meet all those kind of standards that are already baked into the product. So I actually think the goal of an internal product team should be make your product so good that why on earth would anybody want to use anything else, right? Just to make their life so easy, right? And similar to any product, really, right? Like, listen to your customers, right? Make their life easier.
I agree with that massively, to be fair. Like, if you can give people the option, they'll take the easiest option. Most people will take the most frictionless route most of the time. It just so long as those Terraform modules are good, by the way, because if they're
when you get into the
otherwise then it's like
then you get into the product management conversation, right? Around how do you maintain what are the roles of an internal product owner, right? What is that role? What are they actually responsible for? Because there's a mentality around if people haven't got an option, right, they have to use web apps to run an application inside your organization, then they'll have to use it whether it's good or bad, and they'll just fumble their way through it, and it'll be really, really difficult. So it should really be, having options isn't such a bad thing. So that's kind of the opinionated point as well, right? Maybe you don't have 10 database options, but you have 2 or 3, right? And then you open up a little market, right? Like, you've almost got like this internal competitive market, and we're like, well, I'm going to use Postgres for my app because the product team that built that have made it so easy for me. The guys that built Azure SQL haven't done as good a job or whatever, right? And it's painful. I've got to jump through a bunch of hoops. I think that kind of, it's not necessarily competition, but when you talk about product ownership, right, and owning a product, I think that's healthy. Yeah. Because otherwise, if everybody has to use your product, how are you incentivized to make it any good?
Yeah. And how do you do the like shared servicey type stuff? So like systems that need to connect into other systems and all that stuff. Are they like, is that provided as a service, or would you have to take responsibility for that and speak to the other product owner that owns that system, if you see what I mean, and then be like, it's between me and the other service team, and then we've got to broker that and deal with it ourselves? Or does it come centrally because it's like a central thing that's taking responsibility for it?
Yeah, I think the answer probably depends, right? But yeah, and there's obviously like you're talking a bit about dependencies between different services right there as well, I suppose.
Yeah, or patterns, because some ways like you could have like hub spokey shenanigans obviously in the cloud, and it could be that you provide that as a capability and you kind of wire it up, right? Yep. So you could be like, oh, we give you all the VNets or the VPCs, right, and they're all wired up. You don't need to worry about it, and you just deploy your stuff in it. Or it could be that you just like, we don't do that actually, we just do a generic thing. If you want to talk, if that app depends on that app or any other app, then you need to kind of like speak between the teams and then kind of work it out yourselves.
Yeah, I think, so I guess 2 things there. One is that I think building good landing zones for people is useful. Yeah. So I don't think in a big enterprise giving someone an empty AWS account or Azure subscription
knock themselves out with a bit of policy
is a great idea. Well, you're going to put all the policy on, then they're going to go through the same pain again. Right? All right, I need to deploy VNet. Oh, I can't because of this, and then so I think maybe VNet's different, but like creating that foundational kind of plumbing, I guess, is probably something that should be provided. But again, it should be like a product. Oh, I need an Azure subscription. Yeah. Right. Go to the product page. This is how you get an Azure subscription. Right. Might be in the IDP. Click a button, get yourself a subscription. Right. Maybe I want to do that myself via some API call because I want to automate it into my pipeline. That give people options and interfaces to do it. But I think some of that foundational plumbing is kind of, that's like undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? If every subscription looks the same, then again back to the duplication thing, like just do it for them.
Just do it for them. Yeah. There's no value in it.
Yeah.
So at the people side then of like, not necessarily UBS specifically, but like any large enterprise, has that been like difficult to, I guess if you're trying to set strategy and define these things, the more people there are, the more subjectivity there's going to be, and then also like the more diversification of like what you've got to manage, obviously, because so has that been quite different to being like vendor wise, where you're kind of going into customers who like really want you in as well for a start, right? Because they're like struggling or in pain of like how they're going to adopt it. So there's already an open door for like, please help me, open door a little bit a lot of the time. Whereas I guess it's slightly different when you're trying to look overall, like overarching across all of this, to be like, right, okay, some of this is mad, like what's going on here, like we need to rally everybody and then kind of get things defined.
I think definitely as well in like the kind of function that I sit in as well, like some of the value that I bring is that I'm not just looking at a specific kind of stream or crew, right, in like a delivery crew. I'm trying to look across the things, so it often involves, or like most of the things that I'm involved in impact lots of different people, and it requires lots of people. So yeah, it's definitely a bit of a change, I think, in terms of getting that done. You get a taste of that on the vendor side from how some of the product teams operate, where they're delivering some stuff. But yeah, I think the people thing is a challenge, getting people on board. I mean, I worked in developer relations and advocacy, right? So actually, I think some of those skills that I got from like advocating for our developers, evangelizing, being able to kind of share and propose a kind of idea to the business and to different stakeholders are actually invaluable. I think a lot of enterprises, especially when adopting cloud early, you almost need that kind of cloud evangelist, right? And maybe it's not a cloud evangelist. Maybe next week it becomes a DevSecOps evangelist, right? To try and get everybody on board or whatever, wherever you are on that kind of adoption journey. But I think it's often the neglected part actually of large organizations is that internal kind of evangelism, advocacy kind of role to kind of just bring people on the journey, right, and bring them on board and share like this is like we should be doing like, how do we do compute selection, right? Everyone who's from an on-premise environment is just going to default to VMs, right? It's what they know. So how do we educate people and how do we bring their mindsets to actually, why don't we look at event-driven architectures? Why don't we see if we could do something a bit more modern in this space? How do we get there? And that is, some of that actually is like some of those skills around like the advocacy and the evangelism part of my background actually comes in quite useful there as well.
Yeah, I guess collaboration, isn't it? In some ways, it's like pure collaboration evangelism because you're there to work out what they're trying to do and then collaborate on like trying to find the right outcome rather than being really too prescriptive on like just use this. Actually, don't even really get a choice. Like, we're not even going to try and solve it. Here's just what you've got to go and use.
Yeah, exactly. But I definitely think people is a big. I mean, it's probably like 60-70% of what in this kind of role what I do, right? Like the technology is really important. We need to make sure we make right technology choices, set the right direction. But to do that, a lot of it is dealing with people, right, and bringing them on the journey with us.
And what about then the upskilling? Do people do that on their own, or is it like investment? Do you have to invest in people? Because I think that's a little bit what evangelism is. A little bit is a lot of
like education, I guess.
Pure education, isn't it? Because people fear anything they can't wrap their head around or understand. The natural instinct is to like kind of reject it a little bit. If it takes too much mental thought and it's too hard, or it sounds there's cynicism when you don't understand something. In
and
truth.
There's also like an element of fear in there as well from people, right? So different personas dealing with people, different people. Some people are like, right, I need to learn this. I'm going to jump on it. I really need to understand because I need to move forward. And other people are like, no, you're wrong. We need to do it this way. Right? We've always done it this way, kind of thing. So again, it's kind of managing people and personas, but it's education is massive, right? Bringing people along that journey. Similarly to what I said, put a stake in the ground. We're going to go 100% or whatever percentage any organisation may declare in the public cloud, right? We're going to have X percentage of automated releases, right? I think I saw a statistic. Someone told me today actually that, have you heard this, that every developer writes a line of production code in their first day? Right, so that's like a goal that they have. Is like,
right.
You should be able to commit to production within your first day working at the company, right? Which I thought was like, that's pretty interesting.
Oh, that's why it's always going down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. so the point there is around how do we get people to that point where they can do things more efficiently? And if we just say, oh, I'm going to do this, right? People will try and do that because senior leadership have said, we need to do that. So everyone's like, right, oh crap, we need to do that thing, but they don't know how, right? So the education piece, I think, is really, really important and bringing people on the journey. So not only like upskilling through industry kind of qualifications and certifications, but how to work inside the constraints of your specific organization as well, and internal skilling. How do you develop for the cloud? How do you consume our products, our internal products, right? How is it built? Like every single business that I've ever worked with has a different way that they structure their accounts or subscriptions or their tenants, or they have a different resource group for each environment, or they have a different subscription for each environment, or a different management group, or a different tenant. Like everyone does it differently, and everyone will argue for hours over what one is the right way to do it. And one day vendor, like a few years ago, vendors were telling you to do it one way, and then now the guidance has changed. So how do we, so not just industry level upskilling, but also how you do things inside your business. So how can we get those developers and how can we get those engineers up to speed in our environment with how things are set up here as quickly as possible? So never underestimate content creation, good documentation. No one likes writing documentation, right? But like, unfortunately, it's necessary. It's super important. Yeah.
And does that then, the people that are in that team then, are those skills do you hire technical ability, and then do you have like specific people that will just do dev advocacy a bit like you would externally, or do you try and hire like a multi-blended person that's like tries to cover the tech knowledge and the...
Yeah, so I think not specifically kind of as individual roles, but I think having those champions is kind of something that we would look for in kind of somebody's kind of personality or character, right?
Yeah.
And encourage that behaviour as well.
Yeah. So you'd look for it, but then, because it's hard. I mean, in our space, I'm just kind of saying, like, the dev advocacy thing is hard because it means you've got an interest in people, education, and the tech. I suppose, and the outcome, really. So I wasn't sure whether you kind of just hire people that are really good at that, and you just kind of put them in the roles.
Sometimes you're kind of looking for a unicorn as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Someone that can like be an engineer but do that, and we're quite lucky. And I think a lot of organisations have this. Like at UBS, we have a distinguished engineer program where we actually have a certified engineer program where people can they go through a kind of set number of modules to become different levels of certified engineer, and then we have like a panel-based distinguished engineer.
What, these are your own definitions,
it's an
or like
internal,
industry?
No, it's an internal thing that we do.
Oh, interesting.
And we publish publicly, and we really kind of celebrate these people. And of course, we get distinguished engineers. They have to do a good job in their day job, but part of the criteria for becoming a distinguished engineer is some of that extracurricular kind of activity as well, right? Sharing their knowledge, having that wider impact, building reusable components and tooling and all that kind of stuff, and working beyond their kind of day job as well. So we do kind of celebrate that kind of behaviour via these various programs as well.
And that's what like distinguished engineer is, like a course.
So certified engineer is more like a course. Distinguished engineer is like a nomination panel type thing.
So people, you've got to be like, people have to see you as distinguished, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a kind of review process. And then above that, we actually have a technical fellow program as well. So there's a very small number of technical fellows.
Right.
And these are kind of our most esteemed engineers, right, in the business, and it's a small number of distinguished engineers. We publish publicly who they are every year. It's like there's not many that make the bar, right, and it's a really high accolade that people really, really appreciate.
Do they have responsibilities then? Yes, like practicey lead type
so
thing?
They do their day job, right? It's not a job, right?
Yeah,
so they do their day job, right? But as a distinguished engineer and being part of that community, they're often given extra initiatives that they would lead as that kind of distinguished engineer community.
Like problems, so like here's a thing.
Yeah, so like some kind of problems, like industry, big, wide problems. We might be looking at some kind of new kind of technology or some kind of changes in the industry, and we'll say, why don't we get the distinguished engineers to have a look at it and see if they can come up with some kind of thing, and get some great minds together to do that kind of thing.
Oh, that's very cool. I didn't realise that. Yeah, so what does it take to be a distinguished engineer, basically? I'm joking. Yeah. Like, what does it take? It's like, what's the cheat sheet?
Yeah, well,
engineer.
Yeah, I think there's some criteria that we publish internally, right? So people, it's not just a shot in the dark, right? But
do you have to be developer focused? Is it like engineering on the developer?
So most of them are engineers, right? Because they're distinguished engineers. But we have architects as well,
right?
Infrastructure guys and girls that are
hands-on people
as well. Generally hands-on people, that kind of really kind of deep in the technology. Yeah,
that's kind of interesting. And then the platform, because you mentioned then about platform capabilities and like build it, run it mentality, which I think you was kind of saying on if you don't adopt something that we think is like high value and easy, then you're kind of going to go and you could potentially like, you have to go and solve it another way because that's the way you want to solve it. But then if you do solve it the way you want to solve it, you're responsible for it.
Yeah.
To then encourage people to, I guess, use and contribute to things, as in make something better rather than diversify.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it goes back to that kind of inner source kind of conversation. Around actually, rather than going and
duplicating the effort,
shadow IT over there, right, trying to do something, like how can you actually help contribute back towards the real thing? And that goes back again to owning products, being customer obsessed, or about your mentality and saying, okay, well, this is what my customers want.
Yeah,
like I can try and build it, but why don't we work together and like you can help me build it? And if you've got the cycles and the timer, obviously that's not always possible.
Yeah, and do the P&L? I mean, I don't know how. I mean, different orgs are set up in different ways. So it's not. But then I think like if they're P&L'd, as in like they've got they've got a budget. Yeah, I'm a big believer, I think, in this, because the thing that kind of sometimes frustrates me a bit with tech is the because it's so explosive on roles, that like you couldn't have a single team, like you couldn't have a product line with the amount of roles it would take in a large enterprise to cover all of the things that would be needed to have been done, because it means your team size,
right,
you'd be duplicating it many times over, and like you were saying, there'd be like a massive common strip, like of like repeatability of like stuff that should have been commoditized or generalized. But at the same, to budget appropriately, I think if you can get them to define a budget, then using something else means it's not cost effective to do it in-house, if you see what I mean. Because you're like, I'm going to have to hire 2 people there to do this, plus then we've got supportability of it afterwards. So the cost of that, like we need to factor the cost in of like moving away from some capabilities that somebody's already offered. But if it's not costed in and they're not like worried about that, then maybe they will still do it anyway, because it's somebody's idea.
It makes me think about the conversation about getting off the cloud with DHH there.
Oh yeah, exactly.
It's a similar kind of paradigm, isn't it?
It is a similar paradigm, and I think if you can get off, which sometimes is true, because if you can financially justify decisions well, and it's got business results in terms of like financials, or you're confining things with, I mean, money is obviously the key thing in businesses, obviously. So most things are done.
I don't comment as a person from UBS here, but I comment generally to say that if people want to find a way to financially justify doing something, they'll find a way to financially justify doing something, right? And you see that across the industry and the community. Some of the recent activities are like so if you want to justify something, people will always I always love metrics, right? Because I'm quite a big data person, and I always think that it's complete side point here, but it's always quite funny how you can massage a metric to look like what I love. Like there's some of these metrics I see, and my son's going off to secondary school at the moment, right? So you're seeing all like the metrics for the school results, right? And it's like, this is a marketeer's dream, right? The way that you could pitch these metrics is like 3 different dimensionals. You can make a rubbish school look great, and you can also make a great school look rubbish, right? The way you kind of think. And I think it's similar, right? In the same way that if people really want to do something, go rogue, they'll do it, right? Or they'll try their best to do it. And I also think that in all large enterprises, you pick your battles, right? Like if something's absolutely ridiculous, of course you absolutely shut it down and you say we shouldn't be doing that, right? You ring the alarm bells, right? But on the same note, back to my point around making the product so good that why would they use anything else? Like focus on that, right? Because
make it good.
If you make the product so good, then they wouldn't be doing that in the first place. So maybe you need to look a little bit internally sometimes around like, why are they doing that, right? Is my product not that? Is it not that good? Right? As opposed to, and then like you suggested, right? Bring them on the journey as well, right? Like try and catch that as early on as possible. Say, wait, stop what you're doing. Like, let's do it together, right? Let's make this better ourselves. And then if they really, really want to do it, like as I said, they're probably going to do it.
Yeah, it's a budget holder though, because I sometimes think that the person that can then see if you confine something and someone can contrast something. So if you're saying like normally, like an average service costs us like, I don't know, so like 500k to deliver per year, like to deliver, and then maybe like an additional 100k to run or 200k to run or whatever it would be. Then if that's kind of roughly quantifiable of like, you kind of like, it's still estimate because nothing's one size fits all, but then there's a disconnect between the investment of the money from one person and the value of the return. Right. And the decisions that get made between the money and the return of the value, right? Because the decisions that are getting made from that point on are not quantifiable by the person that maybe is like the money holder, right?
Right.
So you're like, I can't really tell. Like, it's a bit like me with builders. Like, don't know anything about certain things. So I have a high probability of like not really knowing whether it was good or bad, like in the end, other than like, did it work? You know what I mean? Or not. But you need to do enough quotes, I guess, to get a sense of value for what you're asking for, right? And I think if you can't do that, then how do you know? How does somebody know the value of something if you can't quantify the effort or everything else? So that's how I kind of look at it. And tech gets tech's got a bit of a bad rep of like how easy it is to like, you know, make money disappear, but then obscure of what it took. So, you know,
I guess a kind of analogy I'm thinking of is like, it's like saying you got perfectly great lawn, right?
Yeah.
And someone can come and cut your grass for £5 a week, right, for the next 10 years, and it will look immaculate, right? Or you can drop 50 grand on some wonderful artificial grass, right?
Yeah.
Well, like, so it's not always the end result. What I'm saying isn't always the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So you might end up with, you're gonna have lovely grass either way. One's gonna be fake, one's gonna be real.
Yeah.
But in 10 years, you're gonna have to redo either.
True.
Right. So I guess it's not always apples for apples in terms of like, and that's what makes it difficult for the people that are like you say, you don't understand the building industry, so you don't know really what value is, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get the multiple quotes, but then you then ask them like, well, is artificial grass better than real grass or whatever, right? And then so having people that understand that at the table when those decisions are made is really, really crucial in big companies. So nobody likes policemen or governance. Somebody said to me the other day, I think it was a Ronald Reagan quote that said the scariest 9 words in the world are, "Hi, I'm from the government and I've come to help you." Right? Right. So like, no one wants to be the policeman or a policewoman, right? But there has to be some element of kind of oversight, I guess is a better term for it, right? Where so those decisions aren't just being made by people that don't understand building, right? But you go and get your mate who's retired builder, who's been a builder for 30 years, or like, you know, who understands the industry and can come and say, "That's not a good decision, John. You should go with that one," right? Because otherwise people will make the wrong.
Yeah, because they won't know any different. Yeah, that's fair. So that's another way to look at it, is that, the guidance on the decision making is probably the bit. Yeah. But yeah, I suppose though, it's got to be better. I don't know. Maybe it's me, and maybe I've got a bit of an agenda on it where I just sometimes feel.
I see what you mean as well around like.
It's quite easy for things. It's one of the spaces where, it's a must-have, right? Technology is a must-have. You can't survive as a business without it. It's highly complicated in some ways, and it can be very simple in other ways, depending on kind of what it is. But when it gets into like engineering, development, and business outcomes and things like that, there's a huge amount of dependencies on the execution, and then money can just like literally kind of vanish, right? and then you might not really have. You look at what's produced, you're thinking, that seems like quite a lot for like what I've got, you know, in the end, and you can't always kind of make sense of it. So I just think, like, I don't know, one thing I've never seen really in any org I've ever worked for, or even now to present day, is anyone publishing as a product line the cost that it took to deliver, like publicly to everybody, and like how much it's costing them to run, and all of the detail about it that's like just there.
Yeah, well, it's also looking at it up front as well, right?
Yeah.
One of the pillars of the well architecture framework is cost, right?
Yeah.
How much is this thing going to cost?
How much is it going to cost?
How many people actually?
Yeah, honestly,
do that, right?
It's
and
one of those weird things.
Like, how many times have, like, in various roles over various years, right, have people said, "What, you mean I actually have to tell you how much I'm going to spend on this thing," right? You know, like, we need this. Well, yeah, like, this stuff costs, especially in the cloud. I think it's quite funny, actually. Years ago, I was working with a customer, and they said, "We just want everyone to start using the cloud. Right? We just want everyone to start using the cloud." It was an AWS customer. And so we're just going to let everyone use it organically. I was like, "Sure, we don't want to put any guardrails in or anything like that?" No, because otherwise they won't use it. We just want them to use it. Next thing you know, you've got 300 grand a month cloud bill. And they're like, "I don't know who's using the cloud, who's thingy. We need to start putting some guardrails in, guys." And we're like, but I mean, to be fair, like, they got the adoption and everyone in the business. So, I mean, like, weigh that up from an ROI perspective. But another thing with the cloud is that, and from a cost perspective, you don't really know what you're going into. I mean, there's cost calculators and things like that, but whoever turns anything off as well, right, in the cloud. So I think cost can just become exponentially. And the
dimensions of
grow.
the costs are mental, aren't they, sometimes?
All the different things. And the whole FinOps, like, FinOps is a really popular thing. Yeah. Like, at the moment, it seems the last couple of years seems to have really kind of drawn out as like more of as an engineering practice. And I think that's only good for the business, actually, that people are actually not just looking at cloud cost dashboards, but actually trying to engineer some cost-saving stuff into the entire process. Right?
Yeah, if it's public, I'd love it. I don't know, maybe like a bit of a. I reckon if someone was to like force it, if you were like an exec and you were like, right, you all have to publicise exactly how much you've spent per service and what like, your run costs to everyone, and everyone could go and look, I bet everyone would be like, oh my God, have you seen how much X is like cost and things like that? But it might get the right behaviours of like...
Yeah, I saw this today actually. Funnily enough, I was looking at... someone sent me the tweet of Elon Musk offering $1 billion to Wikipedia to rename itself. Right?
Oh, really? I haven't seen
I won't say what he wanted them to rename it to, right? Right. But he was kind of making a bit of... the way I understood it was he was making a bit of a dig that they're always asking for money, right?
Yeah.
Rightly so. Like, it's cost a fortune to run. And so I think the figure was, and I could be wrong here, so whoever's listening to this, go and check it out. I think it was, of the money that they called as operating costs, $66 million a year was to host the website.
Wow.
So publicly, people are like, how can it cost $66 million a year to run Wikipedia? And then you start thinking about it, and other people are arguing, saying, have you ever tried to run a website the scale of Wikipedia that's like the top 10 most visited sites in the world? Like, I don't have a clue how much it costs to run that website, but it's interesting that now that figure's public, everyone's like, wow, how are they spending 66 million? But then actually when you sit back and think about it, you think, yeah, they probably could spend 66 million quid a year running this thing,
probably
right?
could, yeah.
And then you probably got other people saying, yeah, chuck it in your own data center, put it in servers, right?
Well, to be fair,
I mean, at that scale, maybe
it would be cheaper.
The right way to, maybe they do already do that. Maybe it's not in the cloud. I'm not even sure if they're in the cloud, right? But but it was just interesting that now that figure's public, like to your point, people are like, oh wow, and then maybe people at Wikipedia will start thinking, maybe we should have a look at
maybe we need to have a look at this. But I think that's what makes it good. I think it's healthy to be transparent, but cost is the thing no one wants to be that transparent on, generally speaking, because I think publicly, but even internally, I think internal public, I think it's quite a healthy. And
it's not only the cost of the service, right? Because I could put a dashboard out that says my service cost me $3 million a year, your service costs $4 million a year. Your service is bad, mine's great, but there needs to be more contextual data.
Yeah, there needs to be more contextual
Mine might
data,
make £70 million a year, and yours might only make one, right? That's kind of that. There needs to be a bit more context around it, but maybe like a leaderboard or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like then you drive maybe efficiencies because people feel more.
I think some people
competitive.
in the past have tried to kind of gamify this kind of thing, right? I'm not sure how widely it's...
Yeah, maybe they all went under in the end. So maybe this is a really bad idea. All those companies...
We're not going to leave and start
no
a startup
around.
in this
space. Exactly.
No, I've got a funny feeling some people try to kind of gamify it. But I'm vaguely kind of recalling something now where it was kind of like more around gamifying how much you've saved on your infrastructure from a percentage perspective. So it was relative to the amount that you're spending.
That's quite good as well.
But then the team that's already fully optimized, like...
Yeah, then you've hit a wall.
They're not getting any credit, right? Because they're at the bottom of the pile.
Or maybe they started optimized.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They just build it great from the beginning, right? And then everyone's like, oh, we didn't get any credit. We've done this
you'd have to do a bad job, wouldn't you? You'd have to deliberately do a bad job.
It's like someone told me the analogy the other day of like, there's like a car crash, right? And there was a stop sign, but they ignored the stop sign and had the car crash, right? The guy that goes and rescues everybody from the car crash becomes the hero, right? But the guy that put the stop sign there, like, he's just forgotten, right? And that's like those guys, right? They're right at the bottom of the pile. Like, I did this right from the first place, but you're just ignoring me over here.
Everyone's like, no one's interested in you. Like, anyway.
But the guy that ran completely badly in the first place.
Yeah, let's go speak to those over there. They're doing a really good job.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's not a good idea.
Cool. It's great having you on. Is there anything, I guess, in terms of like how people would contact you, maybe I don't know, you guys hiring or anything like you want to
so you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Dean Bryen on Twitter, same on LinkedIn if people want to get me there. That's probably the best place to find me. So if anyone wants to reach out, DMs are open. Just drop me a message if you're interested in talking about any of these topics. Always interested to have a chat.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on and just chatting basically with me about the industry. So it's really good. But
thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers. Cool. Thanks everyone. Bye.